Now, let me talk about a couple of reasons why I think Alpha is so needed in our time. We recently did a survey with Barna, and this survey pointed out that, here's a great quote. Culture eats strategy for lunch, right? We can come up with great plans, but sometimes our best plans are really, overshadowed by the culture that we have in our church, the repeated behaviors that take place. We're going to talk more about that later today. We're going to talk about how we can create a healthier culture within our church. But here's why Alpha is so important, is we found that through our survey, nationwide, 47% of Christian millennials would say that it is wrong to share their faith with the intention of converting someone to a belief in Jesus. So half of the largest generation in our country right now feel that it is wrong to share the faith. Yet that same group of people would say that, like 90-some% would say that the most important thing is having a relationship with Jesus. So it's not like they don't believe in Jesus or think that it's important to believe in Jesus. They just don't have a model for how to share faith in a way that feels right. But instead, they've seen models that feel wrong or feel, just inappropriate, disrespectful, and they don't feel like they can share their faith. That is a disturbing number. Here's another disturbing number that we found, is almost 2 in 5 practicing Christians say they have no friends, 0 friends or family members that are not Christian. So on one hand, it means that they've already led everybody to faith, right? That they know. Let's assume the best. But the more disturbing side of that is that they don't have anybody that they're in relationship with. So when we talk about inviting people to church or inviting people to faith, it's not for lack of desire. It's just for a lack of relationship. We have a disturbing season right now where we are losing millions of our young people who are turning away from the faith and their friends who say it's wrong to share their faith. So we're up against a rock and a hard place. Now, I have a master's degree in church history. So if you don't mind, I'd love to share a little church history with you. We're not going to go too far back, though. So some of our Catholic friends are like, yay, church history, a Protestant, talking about church history. Guess that's us. And it is, So we're all Catholic to some degree, whether we realize it or not, at least according to my master's degree. But if you look at the history of evangelism within the church and sharing our faith, and you go back to the 1950s, what you had was a scenario where you've got Christ over here and people are trying to find the cross. They're trying to find Christ, and there's really not that many barriers culturally that were preventing people from coming to faith. All the barriers of whether it's relevant or true or popular, all of those things were kind of behind people, and it wasn't a barrier. So really what was needed was just this conviction moment to help people realize their sinfulness and come to faith. And so you had evangelism or evangelization techniques or methods that came about, the 4 spiritual laws. How many of you recognize some of these? 4 spiritual laws. Anybody ever heard of a guy named Billy Graham? I think Wheaton had something to do with that. The Sunday revivals, the street missions, guest Sundays, bring a friend to church days. Like all of these were born with the idea that if we could just get them to church services, then they'll come to faith because we'll present the gospel and that's what they need. Well, then you fast forward to the 1980s. Culture had shifted a little bit, as it does. And now we've got some new obstacles that stand in the way of people coming to know Christ. There was a popular belief that church is boring and the faith is irrelevant and it's really not true. And is Jesus really God? I mean, there was all kinds of movements that were happening theologically around that. So there was these great resources that the church came up with, apologetic resources. I remember having several really like encyclopedia-style books on my shelf. Josh McDowell's Evidence That Demands a Verdict. Amazing apologetic resources. Our Catholic friends are like, you guys just came up with that stuff? Like, we've been working on this for a while. We've got great apologetics for centuries. But the apologetics movement really began to gain momentum and gain steam. And then we had contemporary seeker services that became the thing. Again, to say, well, if we could make church cool enough or fun enough or relevant enough and hit people's felt needs, Then we could remove that barrier and people could come to faith. Well, fast forward to today, 30 years later, 2019, now all of a sudden, it seems like the culture has shifted so much and there are so many barriers in front of us. Faith is commonly being weaponized and politicized. We, as Christ followers, are often seen as the problem in our culture. The vast majority of people are passive towards spirituality. At their worst, they're very, actively against Christian faith and against organized religion. And Jesus is just one of many gods, and it's fine if you want to follow him, but don't, make me believe that stuff. And irrelevant, yeah, all of these things, but people, there's so many barriers in front of us now. So it leaves us with saying, okay, what do we do? The proof and apologetics, all of these things are not enough. It's not working. People are actually walking in the other direction and flooding out of our churches. So we could, try harder with older methods. Let's just do more guest Sundays. Let's just do cooler church services. But the moment you try to do a more contemporary, more relevant church service and people show up to that, a year later, another church like Mission Church is just going to pop up. And how cool is this place? It is, it's a beautiful facility. It's absolutely amazing. You walk in and you're wowed. And there's always going to be another newer expression right around the corner. So if you live by that method, you're going to die by that method. And I'm not at all suggesting that Mission Church does that. I know the hearts of the pastors here, their heart is to do whatever they can. That's why you have a thriving new method like Alpha that's showing up. But other things, just praying for revival, which we should do, is not going to be enough. We're actually going to have to go meet people and be engaged in people's lives. But friendship evangelism, one-on-one expressions of evangelization, those aren't going to be enough. It takes a long time for us to build relationships and build trust and do all those things. And so we are left now, I think, with why Alpha is so important and why it seems to work. Because the very things that people we surveyed are looking for, the top qualities that they would look for in a person with whom to talk about faith, is that they listen without judgment, and they don't force people to make a conclusion. That's what they're looking for. And that's exactly what Alpha does. That is the heartbeat of Alpha, is listening and journeying with people. Now, I know that there's lots of methods. One thing I want to make very clear is that I am not saying that Alpha is the only way or the only effective way to share faith. There are lots of ways to share faith because it's not about the method. It's ultimately about God. It's about the work that God does. So please hear me saying that. Alpha never led anybody to Jesus. That's God's work. Alpha happens to be one particular way that it works, and we see it work all over the world in almost any context.